Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor, Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian.
Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
And me, Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
Our guest today is Cheryl Thompson. Cheryl Thompson is an assistant professor at Ryerson University in the School of Creative Industries. She is author of Beauty in a Box, Detangling the Roots of Canada's Black Beauty Culture. She previously held a Banting postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Toronto. Cheryl's work has appeared in The Conversation, Toronto Star, Montreal Gazette, Spacing, Herizons Magazine, Halifax Coast, and Rabble.ca. She was born and raised in Toronto, where she currently resides. She has also lived in the United States and in Windsor, Ontario. Her most recent book is Uncle, Race, Nostalgia, and the Politics of Loyalty, published by Coach House Books. Welcome to the podcast, Cheryl Thompson.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you've said that you never really set out to be an author, but now you've gone and written 2 books. What was the genesis of this latest book project for you?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I say that is because I just like stories, and I never think about the form that the stories are going to take. So as an academic, I write academic articles, but sometimes I feel like the academic writing, it's too technical. So you have all these technical stuff that you can't just tell the story. So that's kind of how I sort of developed into writing popular pieces. And then this particular book actually came out of a series of conversations that I had with my editor, John Lawrence. And John and I met because I was working on The Ward, that book series, The Ward. They were doing a second series to that book called The Ward Uncovered, which was looking at all the objects that they had found at that archaeological dig at the old City Hall. And at that dig, they found an Uncle Tom's Cabin plate, like a memento kind of plate. And John, just knowing me and the conversations, knowing that I love history and I'm really into artifacts, he wondered if I had any thoughts on how weird it was that they thought it was strange to find a plate at this site. And I said, no, that wouldn't have been strange at all. And then that conversation led to me explaining the plate for that publication. John subsequently had an interest in Uncle Tom's Cabin, like the Harriet Beecher Stowe novel. He read the novel. He thought I would have some interesting thoughts about it because there were things about it he didn't understand. We met for coffee, and I kind of gave him the verbal version of Uncle, not knowing yet that that's what I was doing. He literally said, "This is a book." And then the rest is kind of history.
Fabulous. What a fabulous origin story. And I mean, for our listeners who aren't familiar, this was a big archaeological dig that happened at Toronto City Hall, the old City Hall, and looking into the historic Black neighborhood that had been sort of on that footprint through the years. When we're talking about a Josiah Henson plate, we don't mean like he had a Martha Stewart collection available at Macy's or whatever. Like, what was the significance of people actually owning a Josiah Henson plate or other memorabilia?
Yeah, so I mean, the Uncle Tom's Cabin was the most popular, most read novel of the 19th century. And because it was so popular, they created a whole series of what they call like spin-off products. So it wasn't just plates. There were tea sets, knives and forks with little emblems about Uncle Tom. People would buy little Eva dresses for their little girls. Like there was a whole memorabilia sort of industry that formed around the novel. And because the novel was read in almost every country in the world, it traveled to every country in the world. So it's almost, I always like to compare history to the present day. It's like, think about the Star Wars series. They make a movie and then they make all the stuff that goes with the movie. So you might never even encounter the movie, but you might have a Star Wars t-shirt in your closet. Then you pass on 100 years from now, people start speculating, oh, were they a fan? And why did they have this? It's the same thing. A person might have bought that somewhere at like a fair. They might not have even read the novel, but it's circulated with the novel. So it's kind of, I would call it like the fandom that is attached to the novel. And that's one of the reasons why Uncle Tom's Cabin just kept like never went away, because there was so much memorabilia that people would keep stumbling upon. And especially by the late 19th century, early 20th century, that time period, I would say like from the 1890s to around the 1930s, people just loved collecting stuff. Like that is an era of stuff and mementos and little stuff. So we really don't know if the person who had that plate even went to an Uncle Tom's Cabin show or read the novel. But what we do know is that the stuff came to Canada and people were collecting it.
So your work is intertwined with your academic life. And how do you juggle writing alongside that academic life? Is there a time of day you like to write? Is there a place you go to write?
This is going to sound funny, but I kind of create like I have a different like room in my head, right? It's like there's the academic room and then there's the non-academic room. They don't intertwine. And I keep them really separate because, again, academic writing is technical writing. There's like certain things you have to do when you write for an academic audience. When I'm writing for a popular audience, the reason why it's different for me, and I don't really have the process of my writing is the same. I usually write like on a Sunday. Like if I have to pick a day, like I usually take a Sunday and I'll just like write through the day. I don't often write during the week. If I'm doing something related to my writing in the week, it's editing. So I might edit things throughout the week, but actually sitting down and writing, I can only really do that like on a weekend, and usually it's Sunday. But when writing for a popular audience, the difference is that I don't really think about the audience. Whereas academic writing, you really do have to think about, well, this is going in this journal and who reads this journal and what are the things that they going to know. When I write, like when I was writing Uncle, I wasn't thinking about who the reader was going to be. I was just thinking about all the books that I had read on Uncle Tom's Cabin, because you have to read to write. So I had read almost the catalog of books that had been published about Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom's Cabin, Here at Beecher Stowe. I read all the stuff. And I started to think, so my process is I think about what they're not saying. And I think about the things that I see people talking about the same old things. And I'm like, okay, well, they're not talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin in terms of how it became a minstrel show. No one's really getting into that. And I kind of have an expertise in that. So I look for ways to intervene in the topic. I don't necessarily think about the audience. And I think that is, for me, the major difference between academic writing and like popular writing.
So you began writing this book when you were recovering from a serious injury. How did writing the book help you heal? And also, how do you hope it helps other people heal?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because at the time I didn't know. I didn't look at it that way. So I was in a rehab facility. And when you're in a rehab facility, you have a very set schedule. So you get up and you have rehab at the same time every single day. And then lunch is going to be served around the same time. Like everything is at the same time. So I kind of said to myself, at that point, I was in a stage of the recovery where I could do some modified things on my own. So I could get in and out of the wheelchair on my own. I didn't need help. I could basically, after my rehab session, I had the whole day to do whatever I wanted. And instead of sitting in the corner and sulking about my situation in life, a colleague had brought me a laptop that I could still work. And so I had not touched the laptop. I had been in the hospital almost 3 months and I had not even looked at that laptop. I was like, no, I'm not there. But as I started to heal, I thought to myself, well, I don't have anything to do. After you do your hour of rehab, it's actually kind of boring in there. There's nothing really to do. So I just decided to write. And I realized, because the structure of rehab was so structured, it was actually going to help me, because I knew that I had like 5 hours every day that I could just write. I did my work. That's it. I'm not going to see people again until the next day. And so I just kept a set schedule. So I would do my rehab like in the mid-morning, I would have lunch, and then I would write all the way until dinner. And then I would just repeat the same thing again. And obviously when I got out of the hospital, the draft that I basically had written was pretty horrible. Like it needed a lot of editing. And the format that I had written that draft in was a very academic format, or it was a traditional format where I was envisioning, maybe 4 or 5 chapters. But as you can see by the book, there are 24 chapters. And so that happened through the editorial process of me also being at home healing and reimagining my own life. And then also you asked like how the healing process kind of helped me and how it might help others, is that I just started to think, well, I'm a different person now. Like I will never be that person that I was before my injury. It's just a hard, cold fact that you have to come to terms with. And so I started to think, well, why do I have to write the same? Like, why does this book have to be in the same way that you always see a book? It's like 5 to 6 chapters. Why can't it be whatever we want it to be? So I just kind of threw out the playbook and just decided, and with my editor's assistance, like, yeah, I think we should just make this as long as it needs to be. So I think that's how the book kind of changed and why it seems like unique, I think, to other books in terms of the chapters and how it's even laid out.
And is there a component of this book that will heal others as they read it, do you think?
I mean, I think the way I tell the story, because I've even heard this feedback from people, is that a lot of people just thought the Uncle Tom kind of trope ended with the novel. They just didn't realize how it's in everything, how it's kind of impacted our cultural world and how we think about representation, especially of Black men and women. It has shaped so much of that. And I think the healing aspect that people might get from the book is the power of recognizing that a lot of the things that they have consumed have been steeped in racial tropes and stereotypes, and not realizing it, because that is the power of representation. It's a soft form of power where you just don't see it. Like, that's why it works. That is the magic of all media content. You don't see it until you start studying it. And then you start studying it over time, and you can recognize and say, oh my goodness, yes, that is Uncle Tom again in this movie from 2021. They've just kind of changed the motif because it's the 21st century, but it's actually the same trope. You can start to see it. And I think that to me is healing, because if you walk around in the world and you're not able to know what's coming at you, you're kind of you're easily led. You're actually not in control of your life. But if you can see what's being sold to you and make a conscious decision about it, I just feel like that can bring a lot of healing to people's lives, because then they realize that you're actually in control. You're not being controlled.
Wonderful stuff. So many of us who live in the Detroit River border region or who have an interest in Underground Railroad history have some sense of the real life of Josiah Henson, the freedom seeker, the community leader, the Black militia leader, author, abolitionist, co-founder of the John Settlement, all that stuff. And many people obviously around the world are familiar with Harriet Beecher Stowe's fictional character of Uncle Tom, which was loosely based on Josiah Henson's life. For example, I have a friend from Romania who grew up reading that book in Romanian translation in high school. A photographer I know from Slovenia told me that he had read it in school too. So it's just very interesting how it's traveled. However, there's this vast distance between those characters and the popular conceptualization of Uncle Tom in the current North American imagination. So how did that gap come about?
Yes, so the historical Uncle Tom attached to Josiah Henson, and to some extent, like embodied through the railway porter, who then had to assume a kind of Uncle Tom-esque public life where they're serving, they're very loyal, very polite and pleasant. All of that really marks most of the 19th century and really most of the 20th century. It's not until the 1960s. Like, I think what I try to do in the book is give a really like in-depth understanding of all the things that happened in the decades leading up to the 1960s. And the 1960s is a break from that, because it's really the first time that especially African-American men entered the public space, not in a servile role, or in a role, if we think about Hollywood film, where they're really nice and squeaky clean and just pleasant to be around. We have the role of the Muhammad Ali types, civil rights leaders, the Black Panthers, who are suddenly on the screen in a very militant way. And they're expressing themselves in a way that's also saying this is authentically Black. In comparison to that now, if you are still the Black male who's assuming the role that had been assumed before then, you're really nice, you're really loyal, you're really pleasant, you're servile, that you start to be looked at as a negative person, as a problem, as an Uncle Tom in a negative way, because the new Black speaks up, is militant, is willing by any means necessary, is like protesting. So then you have this like difference dichotomy that's happening. So post 1960s, if anyone is hurled an Uncle Tom, that means that they are loyal in a very negative way to systems and structures that have participated in Black oppression. And that's the reason why Muhammad Ali, when he was a boxer, I talk about him in the book, he would often call his opponents Uncle Tom. Like he would say that at the press conference so that people would start to see, like, look at this Uncle Tom. He's so pleasing. He's trying to be nice. I am not nice. Okay. I am not going to say the things that you want me to say. I'm going to say the opposite. And I'm not even going to fight in your war because I don't even believe in that. Like he was the antithesis to Uncle Tom. And I think because of that, and Muhammad Ali was just so huge at that time, in the consciousness, there's this sense that anyone who is not that is an Uncle Tom, and they're serving a very negative purpose. And I think why that has been damaging in many ways, and I kind of get to it more at the end of the book, is because it sets up a duality where you're literally one or the other. Either you're militant or you're Uncle Tom. And as we know, life is very complex. You are not a static figure. You know, you can be educated, well-spoken, and really nice person. It doesn't mean that you are loyal to systems and structures of Black oppression. It just means like that's your personality. And so what it's done is that it puts Black men in a box that it's very hard to get out of. And it also makes us as the onlookers expect certain things of Black men. And I think that's what I tried to get at the book, especially in the later chapters. There's an expectation of how people should show up. And when they don't show up that way, we attach a label to them. And often that label is Uncle Tom.
How do you see Uncle Tomism in today's society then? How does that get set up in your work?
So in today's world, it's really complicated because there's never been a time in modern history, and that goes for Canada and the US and really across the Western world, I would say, because the continent of Africa and the Caribbean is very different because there's always been Black people in politics, obviously, because those are majority Black countries. But in the Western world, over the last 10, 15 years, you have Black people assuming really powerful roles in government that have never happened before. And in assuming those roles, and we saw this burden with Barack Obama, who I talk about in the book, it's a question of who do they serve? Do they serve the interests of everyone? Or do they put a special focus on Black community? And if they don't put a special focus on Black community, what you will hear coming out of Black community is that they're a sellout. They're not Black enough. They're Uncle Tom. So there's a pressure to always emphasize Black community, even though you're voted or elected into office to represent your district and represent everyone. It is the burden of the Black public figure of the 21st century. And I think it's something that we've never seen before. You know, you think about Kamala Harris now, like she's facing that same burden where people are like, well, she needs to come and do this. And then it gets really bizarre because you are the racialized Black person, now there's also an assumption that you should be on the side of other racialized groups, even if you're not in that group. So there's this burden because of your hypervisibility that you have to literally be the champion of everyone. And if you're not, then you're a sellout. You're an Uncle Tom. And so it is something that even in the book, I don't really resolve. I give some explanations of why I think it is, but the reason I can't resolve it is because we're in the middle of it. We're seeing the first generation of this new era of Black politicians in Western countries, and we're in growing pains. So it's a tough thing to assume that role. And in Canada, we're actually seeing it play out with Annamie Paul and the Green Party. It's the perfect example of what I mean, of what I try to get at in the book.
It makes it more complicated for them to navigate their world in both ways. Yes. But one of the things that you touch on a lot in the book, and also I've talked about in the podcast, is that creation and perpetuation of negative Black stereotypes in media and culture. And as you were wrapping up the book last year, there were a lot of conversations that were bubbling up around those things. What was it? How did those conversations impact the way that you finished off the book, or any of the things that you originally set out to do?
Yeah, it had a big impact, because the last major edit for the book was around, it was in between the months of George Floyd and like September of 2020. So there was a lot. So while I was doing that last edit, all the protests, subsequent shootings of other African Americans and Black Canadians as well. And so I was thinking, and I remember my editors who are all white, but able to see through a certain lens that actually gave me some good advice. And the advice was to try not to absorb this so much that you put it all in the book, because it seems very present now. But when this book is on a shelf for 5 years, it's not going to seem as present. So it was kind of trying to address the fact that what I was writing about related to what was going on, but then not make it so much that it takes over the book, that 5 years from now, when other things have happened, people are like, this book is dated, right? She's talking about things that are not even happening anymore. So what we made a strategic decision to think about the moment and try to capture it in the conclusion, but not reframe the chapters, so that the chapters, especially the latter chapters, are talking about it in such minute detail that it seems to almost take the book off the topic, right? So that was a strategic move, and I think it was a good one, because now here we are, over a year later, and things don't seem as present as they did in the summer of 2020.
What are you working on now?
Yes, so I'm doing a lot now. So it's important to know that this book, Uncle, in fact, all my books, now that I reflect on it, I always seem to start a book at the same time I'm starting a book. So I start one book and I actually have another book that was already started. So the next project that I have literally been working on since 2011 is to tell Canada's history of Blackface, but to tell that history not in the way that it's been told before, which is kind of, I realize, my brand. I always try to do that. I try to say, here's how you know this topic, but now let's make this topic about places and spaces, community, media, capitalism, all the things that you maybe wouldn't attach to something that is latently so racist. How can we unpack the layers of the racism that is latent in Blackface itself and get at something that is actually really difficult to explain? And what I'm trying to do in that book project, which is also going to be a documentary that I just started with a production company, Pink Moon Studio, that we're co-producing a documentary on this book. It's also going to be a research website and resource of all my artifacts. What we're trying to do in this trifecta that is taking over 10 years to produce is to, what I think, explain in a really thoughtful way, not racism, but the investment that the dominant culture has had for over 100 years in specific types of Black bodies. Like, there's an investment, and it's emotional, it's economic, it's social, in seeing Black people presented a certain way. And Blackface is kind of the perfect way to enter that and to explain it. So that work is going to be a forthcoming book that I will start writing later this year.
And you talked very eloquently about the editing process with this book that's out now. Have you had much experience editing other people? Do you find a different perspective on that? How do you approach the work, I suppose you come across it in your academic work, but do you come across it in other work as well for popular audiences?
Yeah, I mean, I've only had experience editing other academic work. So sitting as a referee for a journal, looking at, obviously as a professor, I'm like assessing people's work all the time. I have graduate students whose works I'm assessing. And a lot of people fear editing. They don't like editors. And that's the reason a lot of people are like, oh, I'm just going to self-publish because I don't want an editor to change my work. I just don't have that mentality. I lean in. An editor is your best friend if you allow them to be, because that's their job. Like, I think part of it is respecting the fact that you're a writer, you give the content. Okay? Editors turn that into cake because they know how to do it. That's their job. A good editor knows your voice. They can see when you've written something. And I've had editors say, Cheryl, what happened here? We lost you midway through this chapter. That's not you. And then, right. And they say, I think to get back to you, maybe you should try X, Y, and Z. And you're like, oh, thank you. They keep you on track. They're like a coach. To me, every great athlete would be nothing without their coach. And I think sometimes in writing, people just don't want to, they feel that the feedback they're going to get is someone trying to change them into something else. My mindset is they're trying to make you the person that you're supposed to be, because you can't see yourself. It's impossible to both write and assess yourself at the same time. You just can't. Somebody outside of you has to say, hey, have you thought about this? Now, obviously, as a writer, you can say, no, I don't think I want to go down that route. You have autonomy. You don't have to do what every editor says, but always leaned into editors, man. They have changed my life. And I can tell you, even my first book, Beauty in a Box, that was a dissertation. It is extremely hard to revise a dissertation into a popular book that people will actually read. And I can tell you, people are reading Beauty in a Box. And why is that? Because that was an editor. That was an editor's work. And without that person, that book would never happen, because I wouldn't be able to imagine it differently. And I think that's really what I'm getting at. An editor helps you to imagine your words differently. And so you have to lean into that and just embrace that here's where you see yourself and here's where the editor sees you. Like, do you want to go there? Do you want to go on that journey with them? Because it's going to be tough. Some of the revisions, not on this book, but definitely my first book, some of the comments, they were very tough to hear. After you felt like you've given so much work, and then someone's like, this is really quite bad. And you're like, oh, okay. But then you sit with it and you just be objective as you can. I've heard someone say that sometimes you have to be, and this is why I love Toni Morrison so much, because Toni Morrison wasn't just a character. In her work, she was an observer. And you have to be both. You have to be an active participant and a distant observer. And if you don't have the ability to do both, I just believe you won't be a very good writer. And editors help you to do both.
Excellent advice. Would you like to share some of your work with our listeners?
Okay, so I'm going to read parts of chapter 11, Uncle Tom on the Big Screen. It's starting on page 91 of chapter 11. In 1914, Uncle Tom's Cabin was reborn on the big screen, with an African-American in the lead role as Uncle Tom. Sam Lucas was a vaudeville minstrel performer known for his appearance in The Creole Show, produced in 1890 by Sam T. Jack, a prominent white burlesque producer who developed the concept of a chorus line of beautiful Black women. Sam Lucas and his wife, who also starred in Darkest America in 1896, were not new to the character of Uncle Tom. As far back as 1878, Lucas had performed as Uncle Tom on stage. When he appears in the 1914 film, directed by William Robert Daly, he is no longer a young man. At 66, he plays an elderly and enfeebled Uncle Tom, a depiction that made a lasting impression with American audiences. In 1927, Universal Pictures made a silent film version of Uncle Tom, produced by Carl Laemmle and directed by Harry A. Pollard. Universal Studios initially pegged the respected stage actor Charles Gilpin for the role of Uncle Tom. In 1916, Gilpin had made a memorable appearance in Whiteface as Jacob McCloskey, a slave owner and villain in The Octoroon, an adaptation of Dion Bouchot's 1859 novel of the same name. When the producers were unable to rid the Uncle Tom script of its inflammatory material, particularly Uncle Tom's docility, Gilpin turned down the role and returned to his elevator operator day job. As Starkey argues, Gilpin's move expressed, quote, defiance on the part of African Americans determined to devise their own revisions of Uncle Tom's Cabin, end quote. Ultimately, Laramie and Pollard's film features another Black actor, James B. Lowe, in the title role. Lowe's Uncle Tom evokes Edison and Porter's blackface Uncle Tom. He is gentle and passive, a happy servant. In this film version, unlike in the novel, Tom dies but returns as a vengeful spirit who confronts Simon Legree before leading the slave owner to his death. Black media outlets at this time praised the film, but the studio feared of a backlash from Southern and white film audiences, so they ended up cutting controversial scenes, including the film's opening scene at a slave auction. Ever since the era of the Uncle Tom shows, many Southerners had had a contentious relationship with Uncle Tom's Cabin. As John W. Frick, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin on the American Stage and Screen, explains, quote, while actual full-scale riots were relatively rare, considering the subject matter of Uncle Tom's Cabin and the sectional tensions it reflected, simply to mount the play meant to risk a riot each time it went on stage. And the incipient hostility toward the play and the players remains to such an extent that as late as 1900, performing it in some areas of the country was regarded as being dangerous to the peace of local authorities.
Marvelous. It is such a fascinating book. Cheryl Thompson, thank you for being here. The book is Uncle, and it is subtitled Race, Nostalgia, and the Politics of Loyalty, published by Coach House Books. I encourage everybody to read it. And of course, we want to mention that Cheryl Thompson will be joining us for BookFest Windsor in October 2021. So look for that information. She'll be appearing October 16th, to be exact, on a wonderful panel. So thank you for being with us today, Cheryl.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.